This is SNK's Neo Geo Pocket Color. It is also the best handheld system that you've never played. Looking at the hardware itself, it's pretty basic in design. It has a horizontal layout and the usual 2 buttons. Following this, it has the basic hardware features that you would expect, like the option for a link cable to connect to other NGPC systems, but it also has the option to connect to the Sega Dreamcast using certain compatible game pairs. It takes 2 AA batteries, just like the Game Boy Color, but whereas the Game Boy Color got 10 to 15 hours of play per pair, the Neo Geo Pocket Color gets 40. It wouldn't be such an embarrassing difference if the Game Boy had had something to explain it, like, say, a backlit screen, but they don't, so it is. The system also takes an additional battery for the purpose of backing up memory and maintaining the internal clock. It's the same watch battery that you'd find serving the same purpose in the Sega Saturn system, Super Nintendo games, and in Game Boy games. This option to save games directly to the system itself was well ahead of its time, and allowed for many games to include the option to save when they otherwise may have excluded it. The most notable hardware feature of the NGPC is the control stick. The clicking sound that the control stick makes is actually one of the most recognizable features of the NGPC. What makes this unique for a handheld is that it uses microswitches, which are what make the clicking sounds, that are manipulated when you move the control stick. It's pretty much just a tiny arcade stick, one that you manipulate with your thumb. Why is it that SNK chose to use this over the D-pad or an analog stick? Well, you know how handheld fighting games are generally a joke? On the Neo Geo Pocket Color, they aren't. SNK has a reputation for making fighting games, lots of them, dozens, you probably haven't even heard of a third. So, when it came time for them to make a portable system, it makes sense that they would bring along their major fighting franchises, as well as a few new ones. And make sure that they were all actually playable. SNK had a good formula for portable fighters. Rather than try and imitate the look of the home or arcade versions of a fighter, they would go for a super deformed look that would give them more freedom with the sprites and look better on the smaller screen. What we got out of this was a series of portable fighters that actually managed to do what the others before them could not. They didn't suck. They weren't a novelty. They actually managed to retain most of the features, feel, and control that we had come to expect from the home or arcade versions. SNK didn't just reskin and recycle the games either. There's quite a bit of variety here. For example, there's The Last Blade, which is notably different from Samurai Showdown, which is in turn nothing like Fatal Fury. There were plenty of opportunities for SNK to be lazy with these fighters, but they didn't take them. For example, characters that appeared across multiple games could have just been straight copied from game to game, but they weren't. You know, it just didn't even matter if they were moving across very similar games. They would still see new moves and revisions to how they would play. It's effort like this that really made these into excellent fighters. SNK and their portable system were the first to master portable fighters, and the only system to come close since has been the PSP, and that took the better half of a decade. A shame, really. Oh, there are other games for the system too. There aren't a lot though. The system did die. But what they did manage to release was impressive, so here are some highlights. SNK naturally brought over the Metal Slug series, and they're good. They have the same excellent quality that the fighters do. One of the must-have games for the system, and the one that I've played the most, is Card Fighters Clash. It's a card-based game built off of the Capcom and SNK fighter franchises, and it's very well made. You should try it even if you're not into fighters. This system has a lot of arcade experience, and you're going to see that with titles like Taito's Puzzle Bobble, and Namco made an excellent version of Pac-Man that has 2 options for screen size. As far as role-playing games, you don't have that many options, but I would recommend checking out Biomotor Unitron, which is a Pokemon-style game with robots, and Dark Arms, which is an action RPG that focuses on weapons rather than characters. Even the bitter Sega fanboys had their own personal reason to hold this over the Game Boy with Sonic Pocket Adventure. This game isn't going to be surprising you very much. It's more or less just a combination of levels and ideas from the first few games in the series. That means it is built on solid material, and it's a good Sonic game for it. Definitely worth checking out. Suffering from incredible jealousy over another company releasing their blue mascot on a system, Capcom let loose the Super Fighting Robot. What Capcom did was release a version of both of the Mega Man arcade games. The arcade games were pretty much Mega Man Boss Rush mode. You would pick a Mega Man character and then face off against a series of familiar bosses. If you're a Mega Man fan, then you're going to think this is fantastic. If you're not, you're still going to have fun because this is a great game. The only thing that would make it better is if it didn't cost more than all of the games that I've shown you combined. SNK's portable system had some great games to its name. It's a real shame that there was really no way that it could have survived. In the beginning of this video, I said that this was the best handheld system that you've never played. I've praised it for its solid hardware advantages, and I've shown off its games, but in the end, those didn't matter. This thing went up against the Game Boy, and it failed. Badly. Things were going wrong from day one. The Neo Geo Pocket was released in 1998 right alongside the Game Boy Color, but the Neo Geo Pocket was black and white. Any other hardware advantages that it had, they didn't matter. It was black and white, it looked old. Only 4 months later, in March of 1999, the system is re-released with color. The re-release gave them a chance to start fresh, and in August of 1999, the system would be brought to the United States. They screwed that one up too. For the American release, they chose to launch the system online through etoys.com. This decision was made by people who are far more qualified at this than I am. But I do think that it's probably, most likely, a good idea to sell your product somewhere where people will know that it exists. While SNK would eventually start to sell the system at major retailers and advertise it, they still went through 2 failed launches in less than 12 months. It's odd that such a poor choice was made, but I guess that's what happens when you put the wrong people in charge of your product. The American management of the Neo Geo Pocket Color was different. They showed little to no interest in communicating with third-party developers. This was a very bad mistake because they were trying to sell a game system. Third-party developers make something called video games. When you make a game system, you want people to make video games for your game system so that people will buy it. Without this sort of developer support, your system is probably going to die. And that's not very good for business. By the end of 1999, SNK was heading towards financial ruin. A few months later, they were bought out by a company that had other interests in their franchises besides video games. This was the beginning of the exploitation and abuse of the SNK franchises. This was also the end of the Neo Geo Pocket Color. Under better circumstances, the system would have sold a bit better, maybe lasted a little bit longer, but it still would have failed. SNK didn't have the support or the ability to launch an honest challenger to the Game Boy at this time, so their system would wind up murdered like all the others. There was nothing that they could do. It really doesn't matter. This is a great system. It has good games, it's cheap, it's easy to find, and it's definitely worth checking out.